Welcome to the Audible presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Stuart Mandel, joined by Ralph Russo. Bruce Feldman is out this week covering the Combine. Coming up later on the show, our colleague Chris Vannini comes on. He's had two interesting stories in the last week about, first of all, NCAA Rules Committee meeting this week, and lessons from the coaching carousel, the recently completed coaching carousel with the addition of Thomas Hammock leaving NIU. First, Ralph, let's get to some items in the news. Joey Aguilar, the Tennessee quarterback who was trying to get an eighth college year of eligibility, he was denied. A little bit of a rare win for the NCAA in the court in Knoxville. You covered that on Friday. What was the main gist of why the judge denied that?
Yeah, first of all, it's a little almost hard to count. Is it his eighth year? Is it his seventh year? Definitely not his sixth.
Eighth year of college,
right?
Seventh year. The most important thing is he was looking for a sixth season.
A sixth season to play, but he had spent so much time at junior college, and that was the gist, right? He, like Diego Pavia, had sued about, and he was actually part of the Pavia suit about, hey, don't count my junior college years. The junior college years shouldn't count towards NCAA clock. The thing with Pavia, though, is where there was a difference, is that Pavia was talking a little bit about the I spent my 2020 pandemic season in junior college, and you're not giving me the waiver like you're doing everybody else who was actually in the NCAA at that point. It was actually competing at NCAA schools. Aguilar took advantage of that waiver. Like he got to play last year because he took advantage of that waiver. So he ended up at Tennessee after a brief time at UCLA. So when he went back to court, and he did it in state court, he removed himself from the Pavia lawsuit, did it in state court, which is all the rage these days, right? Kind of looking for a home court advantage like Trinidad Chambliss got. He didn't get it. Now, it's just a very different case from the Trinidad case. It's a little easier to sort of argue against the medical waiver, whether the NCAA is too strict about the medical waiver. Hey, we have this information, but it was retroactive. It wasn't contemporaneous. Aguilar was just looking for another year. Like he basically was just like, no, throw out the rules and just give me another year. The judge was unconvinced. So now Tennessee, looking at it pretty interesting. Aguilar wasn't necessarily like a great quarterback, but he's pretty good. And now Tennessee is going to go into this season with George McIntyre, a local guy who's a sophomore. Brandon Faison Brandon. I'm sorry, almost got that was wrong. Faison Brandon, who is a freshman, highly touted, but no experience. I think they got a Ryan Staub, I believe it was, is the kid from Colorado who made a couple of starts last year with mixed results, to be kind. So yeah, be an interesting year for Tennessee in terms of the quarterback situation. Stu, the one thing that comes to mind to me is like, you know what? Yeah, develop a quarterback, man. Like you've got these young guys on your roster. Like I actually find it to be, and the other thing that was weird, I don't know if Tennessee fans were all that broken up. Like I think there was a little mixed review. It wasn't a Trinidad Chambliss situation where Ole Miss fans were dancing in the streets. I think Tennessee fans generally would have liked to have had Joey back because he was probably a more safe option than what they had. But yeah, it was weird, the idea that like, there wasn't like dancing in the streets in Knoxville, the fact that he didn't come back.
But people were pretty ticked at the decision, and it was almost like, it's yet another thing that your school is competing for, and you want your school to win. And so I saw a lot of indignation over, how come Ole Miss, the judges like Ole Miss better than us. They like Diego Pavia. I'm glad you brought up, by the way, because there was a lot of, in my mentions from Tennessee fans, like, then how come Pavia got it? Well, Pavia's preliminary injunction last year is the reason why Joey Aguilar was even there in the first place. Yeah. Right.
It was super narrow, right? It was only about guys who were in junior college at a certain period of time and would be playing junior college ball in 2025. Like the waiver did not extend beyond 2025.
And the NCAA, in that case, by the way, was never fully adjudicated, right? They got the preliminary injunction.
Waiting. Yeah.
And then they moved
for
on.
A trial
so
date. Yeah.
It wasn't like that was a binding precedent for Aguilar. So I guess the NCAA will take the victories where they can. Curt Cignetti is a very rich man. He got a big raise during the season last year, and it contained a very interesting clause that said, because at that brief moment in time, Indiana made him one of the 3 highest paid coaches, and then he got, Lane Kiffin lapped that. I think there was somebody else, right, who got above what he was making, and they had a clause in there that said if they made the college football playoff semifinals, they would have to at least engage in renegotiation discussions to again make him one of the 3 highest paid. Well, not only did they make him one of the 3 highest paid, they made him number 1. $13.2 million average is just above what Kirby Smart and Lane Kiffin are making. And I'm just struck by how quickly we went from, wow, Indiana, how is Indiana affording to pay $10 million to a football coach? Like, that can't be right. To, well, no, now Indiana, of all schools, has the highest paid coach in the country. But look, Ralph, this is a case where I think he earned every penny.
Yes, and especially when you start looking at who else, because 10 million used to be a thing. And now getting over 10 million, not that much of a thing. When a list of some coaches who are making $10 million a year, Mike Elko got an extent. No offense to Mike Elko. He's done a hell of a job at Duke and Texas A&M, but in 4 years now, I mean, he's now a $10 million a year coach. I think Eli Drinkwitz contract is now over 10 million. Like, getting Marcus Freeman, we don't know exactly the numbers because Notre Dame's a private school, but I think everybody assumes he's well over 10 now. And
Lincoln Riley's been there since he got to USC. I think he's at 11.
Yeah, but even more recently, and none of those guys have national championships.
Bill Belichick is a $10 million coach. So the benchmarks keep, every year the benchmarks move a little bit higher. Now 10 is the new status. Elko was at 7 or 7.5, I think, and off this one great season, he got to 10. Who's next?
I think Mario Cristobal. I mean, at some point we're going to get word, right, during this offseason. Now, that's another private school, so sometimes getting the numbers out of there becomes a little vague. But I would be, and this is not me reporting. I haven't talked to anybody on this, but I was just looking at the list. And Mario's been to a national championship game, 2 10-win seasons the last couple of years. I think his contract, his original deal there was like 8 for 80 or something along those. And again, with Miami, it's always a little tricky to tease out exactly the money. But I believe he started at like not 8 for 80. It was like maybe 10 for 80. It was 10 for 80. I think at some point we're going to hear this offseason news out of Coral Gables that, they've got a new contract for Mario that puts him among the highest paid coaches in college football. Wouldn't you expect that?
I would. It's just a question of whether I would imagine that's when they'll leak the number out. They'll want people to know that he's in the Ryan Day, Cignetti territory. I could see Bielema getting a raise. He's really had a couple great seasons there. He was at 8.2 as of last year. Maybe that gets kicked up to 9.5, and maybe 10. I mean, I think if Indiana can pay their coach what they're paying him, there's going to be Illinois fans that say, why shouldn't we?
Basically, like, just to get in the game in the Big Ten, you're at $7 million. I remember talking to a couple of ADs, and they were like, if I want to hire a decent coach with experience, I'm pretty much like, and this was a couple of years ago, they were like, I'm pretty much signing up for $7 million. And Matt Rule got over $10 million. We'll talk about his extension a little later. All right, let me pivot to a little news that's in your backyard, and I need you to explain this to me, Stu. The UCLA has been in a bit of a legal tug of war with the Rose Bowl over whether it will continue to play at the Rose Bowl, continue to play football at the Rose Bowl as its home venue. It's been that way forever. Right. And now there's been some consideration about trying to get out of that lease and to play at SoFi Stadium, which is a little closer to the campus, but with LA traffic, who the hell knows? It's still probably a tough ride over. I don't really care where UCLA plays its home games. Like, it's interesting, and the Rose Bowl is great, but, I just want what's best for UCLA. What do you think, Stu? As someone who lives out there on that side of the country, probably has a little better idea of what the logistics are. Like, do you think it's better for UCLA to play in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl, or is it better for them to play at SoFi?
Well, the reason they want to move to SoFi is because SoFi has so much more premium seating, suites, all that good stuff. Plus, they could probably throw in some sweeteners for them, right? And so this is an athletic department that runs a huge deficit and is looking for any way to make money. Problem is, they're in a binding contract with the Rose Bowl that goes well into the 2030s, and the Rose Bowl has sued them, to hold them to the contract. And it would sure seem they're going to have to break that contract, negotiate some kind of big settlement. And so what I would like to know is, how does that math work out? Like, you're going to make more money 7 days a year at SoFi, but if you have to pay some extravagant fee to get out of it, like, are you actually making money out of it? I don't know if these two things are related. And keep in mind, like, this is just for one season, right? They haven't committed to anything beyond that. UCLA last week fired their CFO, Steve Agostini. And he was like the driving force behind this, from what I understand. Mm-hmm. He wasn't fired because of that. He made some comments to the Daily Bruin that were like throwing all these people under the bus for mismanagement before he got there. And I guess they didn't like that. But it was like, okay, that happened. And then that same week they announced they're staying at the Rose Bowl for another year. I don't know if those are related, coincidence, whatever it may be. But I don't think there's a great solution either way. The only thing I can tell you is that I think there's a generational divide there where the UCLA old-timers cannot imagine leaving the Rose Bowl. It's so essential to them. And then maybe people of a younger age are like, SoFi sounds good. I think it's a shame that a college football team would play inside a sterile NFL dome instead of at the most historic venue in the country. But, as always, it's about the money. Where can they make more money?
Yeah, and it's far, far away. I mean, it is a long way
SoFi's not
away.
around the corner. It's just a little more of a straight shot.
Yeah, with LA traffic, it could be. I guess it could be just as bad. Yeah, but again, for me, it's like I love the Rose Bowl. When was the last time you covered a UCLA home game?
It was many years ago, and it was really depressing.
Oh no!
And that was frankly before it got really bad. Like, now they get 30,000 something. Hopefully, Bob Chesney instills some excitement there. There was just no excitement in the Chip Kelly era, and certainly not Deshaun Foster. Yeah. And the interest is just eroded. Look, at the end of the day, it's one of these schools where they just can't build an on-campus stadium. There's nowhere to put it. Yeah, literally. When you said what's the best thing that could happen for UCLA, I thought some sort of technological advancement where you could suspend the stadium up in the sky. Because there's no room on the ground. Yeah, but until then, you're always going to have the problem of how do the students get there, and a lot of empty seats. So I don't know. I hope they stay at the Rose Bowl as like a sentimental guy for the Rose Bowl. I don't know if that makes sense financially for them down the line. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Chris Vannini joins us to talk some NCAA rules issues targeting short shorts. Stay tuned for that, as well as some coaching carousel takeaways. All right, we are pleased to be joined by our guest, Chris Vannini, our colleague at The Athletic, who's been here since day one with me, since we started college football way back in 2017, which seems like a lifetime ago. Chris, welcome.
Good to be here, guys. Good to be back on this YouTube feed as well. Excited to talk about football.
You guys are the veterans here of the Audible. I'm a newbie, relatively speaking.
This show is on YouTube now. What do you know? So you wrote a couple stories that you were busy over the weekend, late last week. And the first one is, the NCAA Football Rules Committee meets this week in Indianapolis. And everybody's favorite topic, targeting, is on the agenda. What can we expect?
Yeah, I love this rules stuff. I'm always into kind of the various intricacies, but the big one is going to be the targeting. It's every year they talk about targeting at the Rules Committee. And what the Rules Committee does this week is they come up with proposals and then spend the next month gathering feedback, and then a committee will make a determination in March. But the proposal being talked about the most, potential proposal being talked about the most is the idea that you would get rid of the carryover suspension to the next game. For anybody who gets a targeting in the second half of a game, you are currently suspended for the first half of the next game. And they're considering potentially getting rid of that because it's an unrelated game. You had Xavier Lucas in the national championship miss the first half because he was suspended for the hit against Ole Miss. And they don't want to pull back on the targeting call itself, but they've adjusted the punishment a lot over, 10 plus years. And this may be another one.
Yeah, let's hit on that for a second. More broadly, they're always talking about targeting, right?
Yes.
We have had, there's going to be tier, and actually it's not necessarily like we haven't been very close to changing targeting in a massive way. I don't think ever. I think there's been a lot of talk of other people, but I think once they get into the room, rarely is there any talk about really substantive changes. The one that tends to come up and that what they're talking about at least gives a little bit of a nod to is this idea of tiers of targeting, or maybe multiple time offenders. That has a whiff of this in this possible proposal, though, right? In terms of like maybe doing something with multiple time offenders.
Yeah, so there have actually been so many like little changes to targeting over the years that I'd forgotten until I kind of went and put this all together. They added the repeat offender thing in like 2019, I think. If you get 3 targetings in a season, you miss the next full game. Which is a lot.
That's a lot, by the way.
I feel like there was a guy on like Minnesota or something a couple years ago who got close.
Somewhere in the Big Ten, yeah. I think there was somebody who might have gotten 3. Maybe Illinois, maybe, I don't know.
Something like that. But the Coaches Association proposed the 2-tiered stuff in 2019, 2020 or something like that. And the idea being you treat it like a flagrant foul in basketball or the way a face mask used to have the 5-yard and the 15-yard. And the idea being that like a lot of the targeting penalties we get now are just incidental. They're football plays. You don't really have the headshots happening anymore, which is good. That's what targeting was meant to do. So they've largely gotten that out of the game. So some people say, hey, how about we go to a 2-tier type of thing? And they always talk about it. And there's always certain people who want to do it. They never end up doing it because, one, they don't want to add more subjectivity to the rules. People are already mad at the officials for calling targeting and believe they don't know what targeting is. So now you're going to make them even differentiate that even more. Do you really want to do that? The other part is there's always concerns about legal claims over head injuries down the road if you have some big concussion lawsuit. And they don't want to pull back on the definition of targeting because of that. Now, they might change the punishment here and there, but the rule of targeting hasn't changed. I would be surprised if it changed for that reason. But there are more and more people, commissioner level who have thought about it.
Which then brings me to this point, right? If they were to go to this system where they eliminate the carryover suspension, or at least modify the carryover suspension, there still could be the carryover suspension for someone who's a multiple time offender, right?
Yes.
Maybe reserve it for that. It would be that. And the other issue that comes up too, that I've heard a lot from officials and people who talk about this stuff, changing rules, is if you have a lower level of targeting or a lower level penalty for targeting, officials will naturally be more inclined to hand that one out more often, right? And that in itself creates a space where it might encourage players to be a little more reckless.
Which is part of the reason they got rid of the 5-yard face mask way back in the day.
Right.
Like they used to, all right, it's either a face mask or it's not, is what they determined. And so that's kind of what targeting is as well. And I think because if you have the option to not eject a guy, but still penalize him, you may choose the option to do that because it's going to upset the least amount of people. So that is absolutely a concern, and why you don't want to kind of create that divide. And like the numbers are, targeting, by the way, targeting calls are going down like every year. Like they've dropped by 50% since 2020. It used to be like 1 out of every 7 or 8 games. Now 1 out of every 4, and now it's like 1 out of 7 or 8. So it is going down.
I think they've done a good job of getting rid of a lot of the like incidental, right? They've narrowed, like you have to be the crown of the helmet, and they have a really narrow definition of crown and all these indicators. It does seem to me, anecdotally, and the numbers back it up, that the incidental stuff, how can that guy possibly avoid targeting? I feel like you see less of that, Stu.
Yeah.
I feel like all of this is avoiding the actual problem, right? Like, I realize it's a rules committee, they're target, but at the end of the day, what frustrates people about targeting so much is it seems like it's enforced very inconsistently, whether it's from one conference to the next, one replay crew to the next. It's a hard call to make on the field. So the whole point of replay, reviewing every targeting call, right, is to help with that. And, Chris and I did this story last summer about, is there an officiating crisis? And people were bringing up that Texas-Arizona State Peach Bowl, which seemed egregiously wrong, to be honest, but nobody ever came out and explained it. There's this resistance in the officiating community to ever explain why a call was that call. The only time you see an acknowledgement is if there's a really bad screw up on a non-judgment call. And targeting is a judgment call. So I just think it just feels like we're in a Groundhog Day here. We're going to spend every year debating whether it should be, miss incremental change to the point. But at the end of the day, the reason there is a sentiment out there to change the penalty, to change the punishment, is because they're conceding that, it's not always right in the first place. And guys have to get ejected and sit out the first half of the next game. And a lot of the times it wasn't even necessarily should have been called targeting in the first place.
Do you guys remember they used to, when you get ejected for targeting, you used to have to leave the field, and they would do
it was a couple of years ago. They eliminated that.
You get like a perp walk out of the stadium. It was like wild to think about that. But I think it's gotten harder to officiate because they have gotten, like, it's very rare that we now go, oh, that's obvious targeting, because players aren't leading with the helmet and head hunting guys anymore like they used to back in the day. That's a result of the penalty. That's a result of coaching. That's educating players on safety and stuff like that. So it is good. Like Steve Shaw, the coordinator of officials, told us last year, he was like, targeting is like save the game. And maybe that's going a little bit too hard. But you watch a game from like the 2000s, and it's like, man, I can't believe some of the dangerous hits that were being made. So it's still ultimately good, and they are calling less of it. And now if you, like, I talked to Dean Blandino. He is the Fox Sports rules analyst. He's a NCAA director of replay, and he was basically like, look, everybody's doing a good job here. And now we're basically trying to figure out, does the punishment fit the crime? And we'll see what the committee and commissioners and stuff like that feel like doing. But everybody agrees that the rule is ultimately doing what it was designed to do, but it does get frustrating when, and to Ralph's point, if you're unsure, throw the flag, replay's going to handle it. So that's where you see it a bit.
Yeah, and you're right about that, because there was at least one really blatant intentional targeting in the playoff. I don't remember which game it was. And I remember seeing it and thinking like, you don't really see that much anymore, right? Where it's like clearly, so it has achieved what it's supposed to achieve. But man, when you're a fan of a team whose game is extremely, somebody really important gets ejected and it's not even clear whether it was actually targeting. No, you can see why people get frustrated. All right, let's get to the real controversy.
Real quick. They did add a couple years ago, they added an appeals process for second half targeting. So you do have teams that can appeal. I think Michigan had one against New Mexico this year that the Big Ten upheld. So like there already is an appeals process too, but now we'll see. They'll potentially propose it coming out of the meeting. We don't know yet, but we'll see. It's on the table.
All right, so Ralph, time to get to the real controversy. Short shorts. Oklahoma's kicker is going to single-handedly cause a revolution in the way uniforms are enforced, right, Chris?
The Theismann. So it's actually against the rules. You have to have your pant leg cover the knee. That was a rule they proposed like 8 or 9 years ago and passed. I remember this at the time. And since then, they have just simply not been able to enforce this whatsoever, because the game officials are too busy dealing with other stuff. Coaches don't care. Conferences aren't really helping. And over the years, those pants are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And you're looking at biker shorts on Tate Sandell, the Oklahoma kicker. Byron Brown at USF, I know, had some really short ones. I saw a picture of a Florida defensive lineman. And Deion Sanders called this out last year. He was like, I hate it as someone who, played at the highest level. To me, it doesn't look like football. And so the Rules Committee is going to discuss it once again. How can they enforce this? And a potential could be an in-game penalty, kind of like the faking injuries thing, where your first offense is a warning, your second offense is a timeout penalty, which is what it is for the faking injuries thing. But that's going to require somebody to enforce it. The NFL has an official specifically there at games to monitor equipment, and you can fine players for all kinds of stuff. College football just doesn't have that. So we'll see, but the pants have gotten so short to the point that they feel like they have to do something.
Yeah, skies out, thighs out. So this is, but part of the problem with this, or where this also stemmed from, is like nobody wears knee pads anymore, too. That's the other thing. Like the pads, I remember when I played ball and like you stuffed the pads into the sleeves into your pants. But like, I don't even think, even in situations where, like, if you look at the NFL, I don't think NFL players are wearing knee pads. Even if their pants go below their knees, I don't think they're wearing knee pads. So I think this is where the problem sort of came in. Even thigh pads. I'm not sure if guys are wearing thigh pads anymore. I would think you should, because it probably hurts like hell if you get blocked in the thigh. But part of this is the pads that go in the pants have become sort of antiquated as well. So you're right. I mean, it's a matter of whether you're going to enforce it. But Chris, I just don't know. I don't know. It just seems like an odd thing to even try to enforce.
Yeah, I mean, they hope, like, the faking injuries penalty last year. If you don't remember, like, if a guy goes down after the ball is set for the next play, you're penalized a timeout. And it actually happened several times with guys who were actually injured, which is not what you want.
First game of the year, in fact, I remember the Ireland game that happened with Iowa State.
But the hope is you call some of those early in the season and it stops the faking injuries. And to my knowledge, like, I didn't feel like faking injuries was as much of a problem last season as it had become. And so if you're able to enforce this potential, pants penalty a bit early in the season, then everybody gets the idea, and then you don't have to kind of really deal with it.
I didn't realize it was such an epidemic, the pants issue.
They hate it. Every year when you go to like these officiating clinics and talk about it, they hate the way it looks. They do talk about the safety thing.
But is it really that widespread? I mean, Tate Sandell brought it to the forefront, but like, how many other people are doing this?
Well, it's getting to another level of shortness, I think. Like I mentioned a couple players. I remember seeing Byron Brown. I think it was the Boise game when they opened last season was noticeable. There are some, but it's also like Ralph said, they claim there's a bit of a safety issue too, that you got to fit your thigh pads in a certain way. And there is some foam around the knee or something like that. And the college officials I talked to say that the NFL people like rip on them all the time for that. They're like, you guys got to get control of this. This looks embarrassing. This looks terrible. You got guys with double mouth guards that are just flying out there. That's another one. They passed the rule in 2015. You can't show your abs anymore. That has kind of creeped back up a bit as well. So it's not just pants, but there are some things out there that young people like to do. And the old farts making the rules may want to change it.
Here's the thing. So you don't notice it because it's gotten so common. Like the average length is around knee high or is a little above the knee. So because it's creeped up and it's so common that you're right. The Nate Sandells, that stands out when the guy's basically literally wearing bike shorts. But with the average player, you kind of look around, you're like, oh yeah, almost all of these guys have their pants above the knee and they don't have the long socks. So I don't know. You're our fashion expert in terms of uniforms, Chris. So I don't know. Does it bother you?
It bothers me because I know it's against the rule, and I know that. Honestly, I think the mouth guard thing might be an even bigger issue to me. It just seeing two of them out there, one of them's neon green and one's orange, and your jersey's like maroon, and I'm like, what is? I don't like how that looks.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some coaching carousel talk.
And we're back talking with Chris Vannini, our colleague at The Athletic. Chris, you also worked on something with David Ubben, your podcast partner over at The Bunch Formation, about the lessons of this coaching carousel. And there was a lot of coaching carousel to have lessons from. We had a lot of opportunities to learn things because there was a lot of coaching carousel. 17, I believe, Power 5 positions turned over, another 13 or so G5. So I think we were close to 30 if you want to include...
34 is the total if you include Thomas Hammock late going to the NFL.
Yeah, which was last week. I kidded on Twitter. I don't know if that's the last move of the 2025 carousel or the first move of the 2026 carousel. We'll consider it the last move.
That's a good point because Stanford was considered the first one of the cycle last year, and it was only a couple weeks later than this. It was like early March.
Well, and Kent State fired the coach on the eve of spring ball. I counted that toward this one as well.
It's always hard to figure it out. So anyway, it's, go to The Athletic, read the story. There's a whole bunch. There's about 10 or 12 lessons learned. The one that jumped out to me that I thought was interesting, and, we were a little behind the scenes. We did a little group call with a bunch of our writers to brainstorm this. And it was interesting to me because it was one of the ones I threw out. The timing. We had a rash of early season firings, which we hadn't really seen that much of for about 2 or 3 years. Like we had gone there was a period where this was all the rage. Get rid of your guy by mid-October. Then it sort of slowed down as the carousel slowed down a bit the last couple of years. Is there any benefit? Or what are the pros and cons? Because I find myself thinking when I talk to some people out in the field and, in the industry, are you really gaining anything by getting rid of your guy? In some ways, maybe it actually works against you.
Yeah, there's no consistent good or bad that it worked out. Like Penn State did it early and their search didn't go well. And they went through a lot of different names before they eventually got to somebody. UCLA went early and theirs was pretty smooth and quiet. So there's it doesn't really matter. And honestly, most of the early season firings felt more like messages to the donors that they take this seriously and that, hey, we're going to need your help on hiring this next coach. And donors were very involved in some of them, especially UCLA. So it's more of it's almost like a PR messaging move at some point. And look, UCLA kind of bounced back a little bit with Tim Skipper and Jerry Neuheisel. So maybe that did kind of give them a brief kind of boost of energy, but there's no real proof, I guess, that it really helps or doesn't help. It's really, if you can run a good search, you can run a good search. And if you don't, you don't. But also it impacts the candidates too. Matt Rule got an extension and another contract when they had a hot start. By the end of the year, they weren't playing very well. If Penn State doesn't fire James Franklin early in the season, is Matt Rule getting that extension? I don't know. And the names of potential candidates, that's me and Bruce and other people, we put out, candidate possibilities for jobs when they open. But there's always a caveat of you got to see how the season plays out. Bob Chesney became a much bigger name later in the season when they were making their run. So yes and no, you're usually not hiring the guy before the season ends anyway, unless some G5s do that. Texas Tech did that back in the day with Joey Maguire. But for the most part, you're going to have to wait anyway.
Well, Virginia Tech, James Franklin, right? If there is somebody on the sideline, which he had just been sidelined by Penn State, you can jump in and do it. And that's why I always think that there's a little bit of you can't hire your guy until Thanksgiving weekend anyway. So what are you doing by jumping out ahead? And as you said, a lot can happen between when you fire and Thanksgiving weekend in terms of who's up, who's down. And just to add one more thing before I let you go, Stu, it does put, I don't know if you found this, Chris, but I found a lot of coaches who were they can't avoid the conversations during the season as much as they want to. They sometimes have to not just have a conversation with their agent, but hey, you need to talk to this AD. And I know you got a game to prepare for. And I know a lot of coaches were talking about that they were feeling that, I think, more than ever this past season. Well,
I went and spent a couple of days with Tulane and John Sumrall, in the middle of that. And he had admitted to me that he didn't handle that well the year prior, 2024, when Tulane closed the season very poorly. And so he went in the offseason, in fall camp it might have been, he was like, hey, like you've all read stories about me and potential jobs. You guys have been reached out about transfers. Like I'm here and I'm staying here until the end of the regular season or the championship. Like I'm guaranteed, and we'll figure it out. Everybody put your head down and we'll figure it out after that. And Lane Kiffin kind of talked about that too with the Ole Miss team. He was like, yeah, I'm honest about it, but we also have players who move around. Everybody's kind of used to this. So I think being open and honest about it and just being like, we'll see. Fans don't always want to hear that, but I think sometimes they appreciate that honesty a bit more.
I mean, now it used to be the exception that somebody got fired mid-season. And now I felt like in this cycle, once it started happening, fans of other schools with like hot seat coaches were like, what are we waiting for? It just became the norm. So one thing you talk about in the story is the interview questions changing, in that the number one thing now on candidates' mind, on agents' mind, is how much money am I going to have for the roster? And so that brings up an interesting point that I've been trying to figure out, right, is how can they promise them that? Because supposedly, right, anything above the rev share is supposed to go through the clearinghouse. But we know that coaches were having conversations where schools were saying, you're going to have $30, $35, $40 million to spend on your roster. So from your standpoint, I mean, is it getting that explicit, or is it more of a wink, wink, like, don't worry, we'll take care of you?
Well, they're not writing it down.
Right.
They're not writing down that they're going over the cap. Now, some of the contracts do say, how much of the cap. Bill Belichick's deal at North Carolina had that written down. But we'll find out in the spring if the CSC approves these things, whether it's your Learfield and Playfly third-party deals that are trying to be real NIL that get around the cap that they're offering to quarterbacks. Like, we'll see. We do not know where that is going to go. But how much money do you have for a team is question 1, 2, and 3 that coaches have about a job now. And Lane Kiffin even talked about that late in the season when he didn't want to talk about LSU, but kind of did. And he's like, it used to be about facilities and Heisman and all this kind of stuff. You just got to know how much money you have for the team, because that is really, it's if that's what it would be in the NFL if there was no cap, really. If people could spend more money, well, who has the most money available for teams? And so that used to be, a couple years ago, agents would ask and this and that, but now every coach is like, all right, how much you have on the team. That's the most important thing. It's going to be one of the most important determinations in success or not. And we've seen it slowly get there since NIL happened. But now with rev share, you can directly ask the AD and he or she will give you an answer, because there is a rev share number there. Now they will talk about going above that through different means, as we said.
Right. I was talking to a coach who is out of the business right now. And he sort of threw it at us, the reporters. He was like, you need to ask every AD what they're spending on their roster. And you can't judge these coaches. Now, of course, listen, I think he's got a point, by the way. I think this coach has a valid point. But of course, he's also a coach. So, he's sticking up for other coaches. But it's true. It's like you guys need to ask every AD how much they're spending. And
apparently he doesn't realize that not every Coach AD is willing to share that.
No, I totally understand. But we will get some insight on the latest financial reports, because I do think that some of the rev share and how the dollars are shared will be revealed. Maybe not. I shouldn't say that knowing 100%, because I think that these forms are still being filled out, and some schools may fill out the forms differently, quite frankly, because you do have to do a certain amount of declaration made public with how you spend your money. But as you said, Chris and Stu, there's all this other, how are you getting over? How are you getting over the cap? And that's not going to be necessarily shared publicly. That's not going to show up on the financial report from the NCAA.
But that's also part of the James Franklin thing, where we knew that Penn State was spending a lot of money because they kept a lot of guys from going to the NFL. We don't know the exact numbers, but we knew that James Franklin was given the resources to have one of the most talented teams in the country, and you lose to UCLA and you lose to Northwestern, and that was it. And so there is more pressure when people know you have that money, which is why a lot of the coaches don't want to tell you, because if they know you're spending more, that's more pressure on you. Texas Tech is an outlier in that sense. Indiana was not telling anybody what they were spending. You had to figure that out by going through other people and channels.
I'm glad you brought up Indiana, because we talked about Coach Cignetti Curt Cignetti is now the highest paid coach in college football as of last week. Bonuses, things like that. Kirby can get past them if he wins a couple of games. But as of like just base salary, it certainly seems like Cignetti's latest bump got him to the highest paid coach. And it does seem like you wrote that the whole Cignetti effect is really trickling down into what ADs are faced with when it comes to hiring a new coach.
Yeah, it was already happening like during last season. And then the farther and farther Indiana went, the more and more pronounced it was, which is like, if Indiana can do this, why can't we do this? Why can't you do what Curt Cignetti did? It's like, you remember the first Iron Man movie? Jeff Bridges, they're trying to rebuild the Iron Man suit.
Yes.
And he yells out, Tony Stark built this in a cave with a box of scraps. And like, why are we not doing that?
Line. Yes.
That is every college football fan right now wondering why the losingest program in the history of the sport just won the national championship with some JMU transfers and stuff like that. And so there was already pressure on everybody to win, but there's a little bit less when it's Alabama and Ohio State winning it at the end and not Indiana, because suddenly every fan base, you see this in pro sports, hockey, soccer, they turn through coaches like crazy, and you just try to, sometimes multiple in a year, you just find the right guy who has the right message, and then your team wins the Stanley Cup. Like the amount of interim coaches who have won a Stanley Cup is like shockingly high. And that lack of patience from fans is now coming to college football. But it's a lot harder because of those buyouts that we're talking about.
Yes, the buyouts. Everybody's listening to this podcast knows how frustrated I get that we can just never break out of this cycle. And you talk to, Joe Castiglione is about as respected a voice as you can get on this. So, we know the governor of Louisiana made that bold proclamation that they weren't going to do one of those big guaranteed contracts, and they did exactly that. And Castiglione says the visceral reaction from those who hadn't been following contracts might be unique, but it's not really surprising to those that are involved in the hiring or retention of coaches. But you don't have to do it. Yes, we're not surprised that Lane Kiffin, who LSU zeroed in on, like when it's obvious there's a one guy and one guy only you want to hire, yeah, he has all the leverage, no question about it. But all we hear about is everybody laments these big numbers, and then it is going ahead and do the same thing again. Is there any hope that some people are going to break out of this cycle at some point?
Not at the top level. Like when James Franklin got fired and Brian Kelly got fired, and I talked to agents and people at the time, they were like, no, this is not changing. Like the biggest schools are going to spend whatever they think it takes to win. And when you're Lane Kiffin and Florida wants you and LSU wants you and Ole Miss wants to keep you, and you're the clear number one guy on the carousel, you're going to get whatever you want. Like that's the market. That's how it works for coaches. It's the coaches
but those should be the outliers, right? Like
it's the Mel Tuckers and the guy who maybe doesn't have a long track record of success, and you're just throwing an immense amount of money at him just because you're worried about losing him. But that goes back into another thing we talked about in the story as well, which is like, if you have a guy who is winning at your school, you'll do whatever it takes to keep him, because you don't know if the next guy is going to be able to do that. It's never going to be the cycle. And I will know also, by the way, the buyouts are not always what they seem. Some of them, like James Franklin, $50 million buyout. Well, that ended up being $9 million, because most of these are subject to an offset from your next job. However, Lane Kiffin doesn't have that at LSU. He has the biggest buyout you could possibly have. It's all going to be there. No offset from his next job. So no, LSU did not learn from the mistake of Brian Kelly. But if you win a national championship, then everybody's fine with it. If you don't, we'll be back here in a couple of years.
Yeah, the irony is they got rid of the guy who gave out the Jimbo contract because he hired Brian Kelly and this is Scott Woodward, because then he hired Brian Kelly and essentially gave out the Jimbo contract to Brian Kelly to a certain degree. Though I think there's some offsets in there.
Yeah. Well, he did the Brian Kelly one.
Yeah. But Scott Woodward gave out the Jimbo contract, the first massive, fully guaranteed one.
The extension one. The extension was the big extension was actually, I believe, the AD who's at
Ross Bjork.
Who's at Ohio State now. Yeah,
exactly. But the first, but he broke the seal. And then they got rid of him, LSU, because they didn't want to, that guy's crazy. He does a terrible job. What terrible contracts he gives out. And then they did exactly what was done at Texas A&M, and the original sin. They went back and committed the original sin and almost fully guaranteed Lane's contract. It's crazy.
And there's such a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you get the number one transfer portal class, and Jordan Seaton and Sam Levitt are coming in, and LSU fans are pretty happy right now, and they're not worried about that buyout.
It might work out. It might work out. We'll see in a couple of years. Yeah. And by the time the 7 years of the contract comes out, maybe you'll have a national championship by then, and Lane goes to the NFL, and everybody lives happily ever after.
It's just there's such a profound lack of self-awareness in this industry, where the same people who are urging you to call your congressman and get the SCORE Act passed, because if we don't, like, the whole industry might go bankrupt, and then they turn around and give these wildly one-sided contracts and get totally leveraged by Jimmy Sexton, and then turn around and claim, well, we don't have the money to fund the cross-country team. So,
and this doesn't happen
it's just a self-fulfilling thing.
It's why it doesn't happen in the NFL. You don't know what any of the NFL head coaches make, and it doesn't really matter because those guys are under contracts that they can't break. Like, even Jim Schwartz was the defensive coordinator of the Browns. They fired the coach. He's still under contract, and they have to work a way to they wanted to keep him. He didn't want to go. You have to deal with this stuff. But it's not as much the buyout number sometimes as much as it's just the ability to get out of the contract. Like,
right.
Yeah.
I
the
can't
length of the deals too.
Yeah.
Look at Florida State. They're just stuck right now. They're in purgatory.
That's what you did. You did. So, like, again, at the very top, you saw there is no limit to what we'll spend. But the step below that, there is. Wisconsin, Maryland, Florida State. There were schools out there that couldn't really fire the coach or didn't have the money to or didn't think it was worth it. Let's try the Virginia thing of convincing our fans to give more money to the players, and maybe that coach will be better. That's the thing with Luke Fickell in Wisconsin. It's like they're not spending at the Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, even Indiana level. So how do you judge what Luke Fickell is really able to do there? You don't know. And so, but the problem is if you're losing already, it's hard to convince, especially in the Big Ten. I've had collectives, people in the Big Ten always tell me this. It's hard to convince fans to donate money to help you win unless you have already won. They want to see the proof of concept first. Unlike an Ole Miss, where they'll throw all the money to get good and then you're good. And it's just a cultural thing in the Big Ten particularly that they still kind of struggle to get over. But you did see it with Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of why Indiana was able to do what they did. They threw money at it. So, all right, Chris, tell us about what's going on with you and David Ubben in your podcast.
Yes, David Ubben and I, the formerly Until Saturday podcast, we are now off on our own doing bunch formation, just finished up the first season, having a lot of fun. We did a college football 26 video game long-term review the other day. We did some transfer portal stuff, so having some fun. Hope everybody, if you remember the Until Saturday show with me and David Ubben, we are now doing it at bunch formation. Come check us out. Appreciate the plug.
Yeah, it's definitely the show for if you're into the EA game. Like nobody does that better than you guys. Also, the place to go for Ubben's inane food takes, which are just so absurd sometimes.
He's sneaking dressing into restaurants now. He's sneaking his own dressing into restaurants.
He's ordering Benihana on DoorDash. Like
having wings delivered to a wings place. Like he's standing in front of a wings place and having wings delivered.
It's a bit now, right? It's like Andy and barbecue.
No, the thing is, it's not. He's just perpetually wrong. We know everything he does is wrong.
We talked about this on the last show. Ralph, we've already talked about it. Ubben wanted to bring his own salad dressing to a restaurant because they changed the dressing and he doesn't like that. Is that out of bounds? Stu, is that out of bounds?
So far out of bounds.
Yeah.
If you're on some sort of restrictive diet, I guess, but no. Well, no, great. Now we have to bring him on to defend himself because we just took all these unsolicited shots.
That's okay.
All right, Chris, thanks so much.
You should see the shots I take at him in our group text. This is tame.
All right, Chris, thanks so much for coming on. We'll see you again soon.
Good to see you guys.
Before we head on out of here, we just want to take a moment to recognize the tragic death of Rondale Moore, former Purdue star, been in the NFL for a few years, most recently with the Minnesota Vikings, 3 years with the Arizona Cardinals. Moore, only 25, was found dead over the weekend of what authorities said was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Rest in peace, Rondale Moore, an amazing player, will always be attached to one of the most famous games in recent Purdue history and maybe in all of Purdue history. An upset in his freshman year of at the time, I believe, number 1 or number 2 Ohio State. He was the best player on the field with a bunch of NFL players as a freshman. He had 115 catches that year as a freshman and was an All-American. The injuries started not long after that. His sophomore year and his junior year of college were cut short by injuries. His professional career, after being a second-round draft pick, was very much hampered by injuries. Gone way too soon. Rest in peace, Rondale Moore. And for anybody who needs help, please reach out to your friends and families. We're praying for Rondale Moore's family this week.
That's it for our show today. We will be back later in the week. Ralph and I will. And we'll be answering your mailbag questions on that one. So send your emails to theaudiblepod@gmail.com, and we will see you next time.